I truly believe that doing what you love is what keeps you sane. For years now, my life has looked somewhat chaotic from the outside. I spend every bit of cash and spare time I have on this damn Land Rover, but this car is my key into nature. Living in a car is much more than the physical aspect of it all. It's a state of mind where simple is good and everything is appreciated. Several years back, I was working at a school and planning to become a teacher, but I couldn't force myself into doing something for the rest of my life that I wasn't truly passionate about. I'm now heading down the less logical road less traveled. On this road, you start to appreciate everything. I'm doing all of this in an unusual way just to finance it all. I don't really have any savings, but I still dream about being on the road at all times. To achieve this, I'm working as a photographer in the city, and still living in the car in the more urban surroundings. I've been doing this for so many years now that it just makes sense to me, avoiding the unnecessary cost of an actual home, despite the hassle it may bring. And this is why I'm living in a Land Rover in Norway. My name is Kasper. I'm a photographer in my mid-20s, living full-time in this Land Rover. I've been doing so since I was 22, with a break every now and then. The first 6 months was a test project for me, ditching my apartment just to save some cash and sleep in the back of my car for a while. I was fully focused on growing as a photographer at the moment, so I ended up quitting my teaching job to work and live in the Arctic. In the end, I spent 14 months up there, living out of this car, working with tourists all up until the pandemic put a stop to that. I then moved back south to overhaul the car and find some steady work whilst waiting out the ongoing situation. This week I'm escaping the city for some time. I usually don't make any big plans before driving off. Often I just point out a region or a direction and just drive off. This time isn't too different, but I wanted to visit a mountain road that I only driven during summer. I found an email to someone working at the municipality of Peugeot, and I asked about the road. They simply replied that it wasn't really closed, but it wasn't really open either, and would definitely not get plowed if it started to snow up there. That was basically a green light for me.
And in this life we all know that the starting is the hardest part. Do you believe me? Or even see me as I fall apart?
What I didn't take into consideration was a complete whiteout in addition to the snow. And with only one car, it didn't really make sense to risk getting stuck up there all by myself. I decided to just back up a bit, finding myself a sheltered spot to make some food and wait out the fog and reevaluate this end. I somewhat gave up on anything interesting happening that day, but after just lying in bed for half an hour, I heard the sound of a car coming up the hill. And it was this guy. Weirdly enough, Johan and I didn't really know each other, but we were friends on Facebook. Both of us had planned the same trip on the same day, and with the security of being one car to tug out the other, we just plowed up towards the summit. The last 500 meters to the top was covered with a deep drift of snow. Having been there in the summer, and knowing the drop next to the railing, we decided to turn around and find a camp right under the summit instead. It's easy to just assume that a mountaintop like this during winter is hell on earth. And even though it's a harsh place to be, one side of me just loves these places. The atmosphere in places that people seem to avoid is often the most interesting to watch for the few that wanders out there. As the temperatures were dropping, I recalled that my cheap diesel heater is not working at the moment. And after Johan flexed his heater on me for a while, he had a couple of beers and some music in the roof vent, followed by me climbing back down to the Land Rover for a deep sleep in the freshest air there is. Any place looks good in the right lighting, but I'm without doubt a sunrise person. Ironically, I don't really like to wake up early, but whenever I'm going somewhere like this, I set my alarm before the predicted sunrise. Luckily, it's winter now. You actually get to sleep until at least 8 in the morning. The sun will rise over these mountains before 4 o'clock in the morning during summer, so whenever I'm hiking with a tent, I almost push myself into sleep deprivation just to watch the setting and the rising sun. As we were driving down from the mountains again, it became very obvious that the Land Cruiser were currently only rear-wheel drive. Crossing the snow line, we aired up again with the onboard system in the Toyota and got back to town for fuel and supplies. Johan didn't really have any plans for his trip either, so after trying to fix his car at the gas station for some time, we drove the main road around the mountains we camped at, towards the national park, Rondane. Norwegians are extremely fortunate when it comes to our nature. Both the fact that it looks the way that it does, but also the cultural acceptance for using nature for recreation. Wherever you feel like in this country, you can set up a tent or take a hike. It doesn't matter if there is someone owning the forest, it's still free to use. There is strict rules on where you're allowed to drive your car, but with all these mountain roads open for public, you can still bring your car deep into the mountains. From there, you have endless of opportunities, by foot or with a bike. And the reason for this is a Norwegian law called allemannsretten. It's a law that allows you to use nature as you please. As long as it's not farmed land, you can walk there. As long as you're more than 120 meters away from a house or a cabin, you can set up a tent there. This works so well because of the Scandinavian culture, where it's the norm to leave a camp spot as you found it, or better. Waking up at the edge of Rondane with some actual good weather, I was super stoked to just keep on going after breakfast. The snow-covered mountains in the distance started to look more and more iconic as we came closer. Johan had planned to drive further south, and since my trip was now heading northwest, we took a coffee break and drove our separate ways. Even though I do love to meet new people along the way, I also wholeheartedly enjoy my own company just as much, driving off into the wild landscape with only myself to care for, nothing and no one to take into consideration. I spent so much time up north, where you have alpine landscape shooting straight out of the ocean. And my mind was set on that being my favorite region in Norway. But I can't deny the fact that the grandness of a landscape like this humbles me in a whole different way. The year I lived in the Arctic, I was only focused on taking photos. And maybe a bit too focused on that. It's obviously more work, but with this format, I can actually show you more of what I see when I'm traveling, and describe more precisely what I feel. A solid reason, an excuse to drive back north and show it all in a different perspective. This trip is somewhat different from my usual ones. I often end up hiking somewhere unreachable by car, but this drive here is exactly that. A drive. I just needed to get away from work, responsibilities, and, to be honest, people. Every now and then people ask me if I ever get lonely when I'm traveling this way, and I often take a step back when I get asked things like that. It's a good time to evaluate what you're actually doing. I'm often alone, but never lonely. This hobby or lifestyle of mine started with me wanting a new way to relax. In the same manner as people recharge on their couch, I use this as a way to recharge. My drive continued through and out of the national park, and into another. This park is called Dovrefjell. Even though the parks are right next to each other, the landscapes drastically changed as you enter this region. While Rondane has sharp mountains and wild reindeer, Dovre has that as well, in addition to these grand flats. The roads leading into these flats are made due to slate mines that are still active today. And back a few hundred years, there even used to be gold mines here. These huge open areas are home to an ecosystem that might look flat and pale, but some of the plants you'll find here is hard to come by anywhere else. Parts of the Norwegian west coast is actually qualified as a rainforest, and the national parks there are filled with glaciers due to the amount of downpour over the years. This place, on the other hand, only have one glacier, hidden away somewhere in these mountains. Travelers have always crossed these mountains on their way north, and there's a lot of historical roads left behind. The history of this place goes all the way back to when this used to be the hunting grounds for the indigenous people in Norway, the Sami. Apart from a few open mines, these hills looks untouched, and have been for a long time. Back in the early 2000s, this region also got the National Park stamp, preserving it for the future. The highland roads here often serve a purpose, or at least they used to. Some lead to dam construction, others to radio towers and mountain cabins. The roads built for hydroparks and other constructions are often open for use after the need for the road disappears. Some of them are free, but most of them charge you a couple of bucks just to help maintain the road. Norway looks extremely raw, but by car you can't really do anything wild here. Due to some warm weeks, there wasn't really much snow in the mountains considering the time of year. So I decided to drive up the highest road we have in Norway, leading towards a mountain cabin. This place is used as a starting point to summit the highest mountain we have. The drive isn't really an achievement. You can drive your Porsche up there in the summer, but I wanted to sleep up there, officially being the highest parked car in Norway for the night. The road itself, on the other hand, that's an achievement. Originally, there was one man starting out this massive project with a shovel and a pickaxe back in 1939. People thought it was crazy, but nowadays, there is a paved road leading all the way up to the hotel that has been there in some form or another since the late 1800s. In your 20s, there are so many things that people tell you that you should have done. By that age, you should have done this, and by this age, you should have done that. On the other hand, I keep on talking to more and more people that regret not doing something for themselves first. I feel like focusing on what you actually want to spend your time doing is what matters the most. I'm sort of torn in between. I want to build something around what I do, but nonetheless, I also just want to pull out a camping chair and sit completely still and watch the sun dip below the horizon. As spoiled as I am, I'm used to always having time. But I trade away a lot of luxuries just to have all this time. Luxuries that some people can't live without. And what about the future? Well, that road is still wide open.